Hi guys, welcome back. My name is Mimi G. If you guys don't know me, you should probably go back to the first video in this series so you guys can see why I'm doing this. But very quickly, I am the founder of mimigstyle.com, sewitacademy.com, which is an online sewing and fashion design school, and co-owner of Melanated Fabrics with my dear friend and partner, Brittany J. Jones. So this is video 2 in the series of just things you should know in case you're interested in learning to sew, and some of the most frequently asked questions that we get from people interested in learning to sew via Sew It Academy. And just sort of the questions that I get messaged or DM'd or I see posted in the comments that I thought over the next several days, going into the next week or so, I would sort of cover in these videos. So this video is what you should know before you decide that you want to learn to sew. Now, these videos are not meant to deter you or scare you into learning to sew. But I think if you're honest about what it takes, you're just better prepared than if you don't know nothing and then you start learning to sew and you get really frustrated and you don't want to do it anymore. So one of the things that is really great about Sew It Academy is that we don't skip any steps. We literally teach you everything. Everything. We talk about all the little things that you don't know and that you won't learn from just like jumping on YouTube and trying to learn how to sew. Because there's so many different things that are not taught. Because, when we do YouTube videos or when other people do YouTube videos, we're doing these tutorials based on the assumption that you know a certain level of sewing. And if you don't, it could be, like I said, really frustrating. So, Sew It Academy sort of takes that away, right? You don't guess, you know exactly what you are going to learn. And one of the really great things is that I have seen many students who have been sewing for years, who are not beginners, but they start Sew It Academy, and within the first 2 or 3 videos, they're like, oh my God, I'm learning all these things that I never learned. These are like fundamental things that will make your sewing experience so much easier that you just didn't learn if you started on YouTube. Just real talk. Okay. So, first thing is you're gonna need to make space for sewing, right? It's not like you're just gonna have like a little sewing machine and you're just gonna prop that sucker up on the table and you're just gonna sew and that's it. No. The truth is it takes up space. You need space to cut, right? So when I first started, I used to take my sewing machine out when I needed it and I would convert my dining table into my sewing table. I would use my dining table to cut because you gotta cut your patterns, you gotta cut your fabric. So you need space to be able to do that. Then I would just put everything away, after I was done. After a certain amount of time, I'm just gonna be real, your girl didn't want to put things away. So the dining table just turned into my sewing space. So to start, okay, cool. If you just don't have a lot of space and you want to use your dining table, no problem. That would be great. Use that. But at a certain point, you're going to start accumulating things, right? You need space for your iron and your ironing table and your fabric and your notions and your supplies. And so all of these things will take up space. So just know that you are going to need to allocate somewhere for your new hobby. The other thing is it takes time. It takes time to sew, but there is this misconception that you need like huge blocks of time in a day to sew, and that is not true. I tell my students in Sew It Academy, really all you need is 15, 20 minutes, a day, maybe 2 or 3 times a day, 2 or 3 times a week to spend on your Sew It Academy courses. You don't need to sit down and spend 4 hours every day to learn to sew. And when we make projects, if you do 30 minutes a day over several days, you'd be surprised what you can make in a week. As a matter of fact, my partner Brittany J. Jones has a series on her YouTube where she sews for 30 minutes and then shows you, literally turns on the clock, sews for 30 minutes and then stops and shows you everything she was able to accomplish in those 30 minutes. And over that week, you have a finished garment or a finished project. So don't feel overwhelmed. Don't feel like you have to set aside huge chunks of time in order to do this. You just need to allocate maybe 30 minutes a day, a couple times a week, If you have more time, fantastic. If you don't, that's cool too. Let's see, what's next? Oh, this is another thing you should know. You're gonna spend 65, 70% of your time prepping, right? So you think, oh, my time is gonna be sewing. Sewing is about this much time, and then there's like this much prep. First, you have to decide what fabric you're gonna use and what pattern you're gonna use or what project you're gonna be making. Then you need to cut your pattern. You need to modify it, right? Because let's say you're going to modify something on the pattern. Then you're going to cut your fabric. Now, before you cut your fabric, you might want to pre-treat your fabric. So I'll give you a quick example. And all of these topics could be like their own videos. Like for real, there's so much. That's why Sew It Academy is so great. But anyway, so let's say you're going to make a pair of denim pants or something, right? And you go ahead and you cut it and you sew it and then you wear them and then you wash them and then you take them out of the dryer and the shit don't fit. That's because you didn't account for shrinkage in your fabric. So most of the time, and I don't do it always, I will say that, you have to pre-treat your fabric, right? You want to wash it and you want to dry it just like you would the finished garment. Now, if you're working with silks or wools or something fancy and you would normally dry clean it, then dry clean it, right? So you don't have to worry about that now because then you're going to finish the garment. You're going to only dry clean it. But if it's something that you put in the wash, like cottons or rayons or denims, whatever, you want to pre-treat it before you cut your fabric. And then there's, trying it on as you're going and pressing, which people don't tell you. You are going to be pressing a lot. Anybody who follows me knows, and they can say it along with me, if you sew a seam, you press a seam. So there's a lot of prep that goes into sewing. It's not just sewing. Let's see. There is so much more that you need to learn besides sewing in a straight line, right? You need to learn how to cut. You'd be amazed how difficult that is, especially if you're just starting out. And for me, I use a rotary cutter. I don't use scissors, but I know a lot of people who do use scissors. I use a rotary cutter because it's easier on my wrist because I do have issues with my wrist. And so I had to stop using scissors many years ago. But try it, right? See if you can cut better with scissors or cut better with rotary cutters. That's one of the things that you actually have to learn, right? Sometimes when you start cutting, it could be like jagged edges and not the group. But we do cover that in Sew It Academy too. How to properly cut, how to pin your pattern or use pattern weights, which is what I do. How to fit and make small modifications, like maybe just shortening a pattern or lengthening a pattern or taking a pattern in or grading a pattern from one size to the next. How to properly press, how to use a pressing cloth. I mean, there's a lot of little things that you want to sort of learn. It's not just get under your machine and go. Let's see, what else? Ooh. Another thing to know is that the hardest part sometimes is in the prepping, right? Picking your fabric can be probably the most difficult thing. We have an entire course in Sew It Academy, aside from learning to cut and pin and pre-treat your fabric and all of those things which we teach. We also teach you how to choose fabric. So one of the most important things is learning how the fabric is going to work with the pattern. And it's probably the one thing that most sewists have a problem with, especially if you're new, because you don't know, like you're reading in the back of an envelope and it's like, oh, it works great for a twill. And you're like, well, what the hell is that? A stretch woven, and then you're at Joann's trying to find some fabric. Like there's no section that says stretch wovens. Like, you sort of have to know what these things are. So we have a class in Sew It Academy where we talk about building a swatch book so that you know and can start identifying content, right? So like the content in the fabric is really important so that you know, what is that going to feel like? How is that going to hang on my body? Is this too stiff? So a lot of projects end up not being great because you just didn't know how to pick the right fabric. And so that's one of the things that is probably the hardest. And also then knowing what needle to use, right? You want to know what needle goes with what fabric. And the other hardest thing, I think, is learning to grade patterns, going from one size to the next. Like I generally do like a 12 at the waist, but like a 14 or 16, depending on the style. at the hips. And so I want to be able to grade from one size to the next. There's so many different things. This is really important. There is no one way to do something. That's one of the things that bothers me the most when I see maybe more experienced sewists saying things in comments to beginner sewists about how they're doing something. Listen, if it works for you, then do it. There is no right or wrong way to do, is there a technical way? Yeah, I'm sure there's a technical way to do everything, but you do things according to what works for you. So please don't get discouraged by that. The other thing you should know is that once your friends and family learn that you're learning to sew or that you are sewing, they are going to come ask you to make them things. Just say no. The quickest way to lose joy in sewing is when people start asking you to hem their pants and make alterations. And can you make me this for $20? Child, please, no. The answer is no. So just say no, no, and no. And then the last thing is that you're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes. I still make mistakes all the time. Learning to sew is something that you do continuously, right? We started Sew Academy 6 years ago. I have students that are still with me because we're now learning tailoring. We're now doing, couture techniques. We're now doing elevated things that you have sort of grown over the years. I still learn things all the time. I'll be watching something or a tutorial or somebody on Instagram and I'll be like, oh man, I never thought to do that. This is new. Let me try this. And so making mistakes is absolutely 100% needed because the only way for you to learn and grow is to make mistakes. One of the funniest things is when people tell me, oh, Mimi, I wish I could sew. And I'll be like, but you can, because I was not born learning to sew. When I started learning to sew, I was awful. I wish I had like all of the terrible garments that I made that did not fit me. Because I didn't know so many things that you need to know before you start making things. And I didn't have a Mimi G. I didn't have a Mimi G style to help me. So, I learned by trial and error. But even now I learned through trial and error. So it's something that happens to everybody, even the most experienced sewists. So just, take it easy on yourself. Know that it's part of the process. Accept it, lean into it, and know that with every mistake, you're learning something, and so that it's okay. This is one of the things that especially when you start, you don't need to strive for perfection. You want to give yourself time. It takes patience. Sewing takes patience. It can be very frustrating. And you just need to be okay with learning, making mistakes, and starting again, and just knowing that eventually it will start to make sense and you'll get better and better and better. So please know that even Mimi G sucked when I started sewing and things did not fit or look good, and I just knew that I wanted to learn badly enough that I stayed at it. So that's my message for today. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.